Well, welcome to Legal AF and Court Accountability. We're so excited to have the chance to talk with you about some of the late breaking news of what's happening in our country. And right now, one of the things that has really captured our attention is the fact that Donald Trump has said that he will appoint John Sauer to be the Solicitor General of the United States. Sauer is the man who many Americans first heard about when he was arguing that a president could use SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political enemies, and that would be a quote official act that would be immune from criminal prosecution. There's a lot more to know about John Sauer. Not that that isn't enough. That could be just the beginning and the end of what someone would need to know about someone who should not become Solicitor General. But let's talk about that, Alex, and tell us a little bit more about what the SG does and why this matters so much.
Yeah, Solicitor General of the United States, a very important sort of like under maybe a little bit more under the radar nomination. Certainly hasn't got as much attention as obviously the Attorney General selection and the bonkers Attorney General selection of Matt Gaetz or Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, I can't believe these words are coming out of my mouth. Or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the HHS Secretary. But the Solicitor General is basically sort of the government, the United States government's top lawyer at the Supreme Court. Oversees a staff of incredibly talented, usually incredibly talented. We'll see how that office shakes out under this Trump administration. I wouldn't be surprised if there was an exodus of the incredible legal talent that has amassed under Biden's Solicitor General, Elizabeth Prelogar, who many regard as perhaps the best SG in American history, who has been talked about as a shortlister for potential Democratic appointments to the Supreme Court. She is just astounding, and she has put egg on the face of Justice Alito in particular in more than a few arguments over the last term. And so that's the primary role of the Solicitor General is to brief and argue cases at the United States Supreme Court. But what I didn't quite realize until I spent time as an appellate lawyer at the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department was the extent to which the Solicitor General really guides and directs legal policy across the Department of Justice. Of course, there's some other offices that have important roles to play. The Attorney General, at the end of the day, makes the decisions about what policy and legal positions, which obviously the legal and the policy kind of questions are often highly intertwined. But it's the SG that ultimately makes a lot of the most important calls. And I realize that it's kind of interesting, but and a little bit of a detour. But as a civil rights attorney, we were always trying to advocate for broad enforcement of our nation's civil rights laws, and that would often come up against pressure from another division of the Justice Department, the Civil Division, which has actually an institutional United States-based interest in limiting the application of civil rights laws, because the United States is often a defendant in civil rights lawsuits, like discrimination lawsuits. So when we would have policy or legal, questions where the Civil Division and the Civil Rights Division would disagree, you would write a memo. Each division would write a memo. It would go up to the Solicitor General's office. They resolve those questions. And so you can imagine, I mean, I think we anticipate a lot of lackeys in all of the divisions at Justice and a lot of alignment. But at the end of the day, it's going to be this guy, John Sauer, and his office of appellate lawyers at the Solicitor General's office that are going to be the people that are really shaping the Department of Justice and thereby the United States' legal agenda from that position. I think that's going to all the more true when you've got such a neophyte, such a dunce as Matt Gaetz really running the show. So on the questions that we often dig into on questions of constitutional law and their effects on people's lives, it's going to be John Sauer who's.
Yeah, and I guess I mean that was an excellent summary and why the gravity of the post. I would just I guess maybe add a couple things into the conversation, which are first of all the SG position is also a stepping stone to a Supreme Court nomination. A number of people who have been in that role or served in that office, then the next step for them is a position on the Supreme Court. And the idea, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but the idea of of SEAL Team Six guy, justifying assassination, getting appointed to the Supreme Court would only make the court worse. Not that there's a vacancy, but like that position is not just a position; it's a position that opens the door for other positions. And the other thing is, I've been looking at some of the history on John Roberts, for the book I've been working on, Alex. And one of the things that really struck me is the role that the SG's office plays in not being a party to a case, but weighing in on the cases of other states. And so when Ken Starr was the Solicitor General for George Herbert Walker Bush, and John Roberts was assisting him, Ken Starr weighed in on a case out of Pennsylvania where the largely Republican legislature was trying to make women get the consent of get their notice to their husbands before they could seek an abortion. And that case would have just been a case between the state of Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania reproductive rights advocates. But the U.S. weighed in to try to put their thumb on the scale of justice on the side of these restrictions that the lower court had found would make it much harder for women to access abortion, and allow men, once they got notice, to threaten the women or their children, withhold money, and all that sort of stuff. But that was a case where the SG used the power of that office to try to aid an anti-abortion agenda. And here you have someone in John Sauer who has an extensive anti-abortion agenda. So to me, there's no doubt that he would use this post not just within the Department of Justice, but also to try to put his thumb on the scale of justice in favor of these repressive, regressive laws coming out of these other states, which I'm happy to talk about in more detail. But like, that state intervention is also a powerful part of that office.
Yeah, and not just at the Supreme Court too, right? It's the SG's
Yeah.
office that approves amicus briefs being filed in circuit courts, in other
Yes.
courts. Probably most of the time, it's going to be circuit court amicus briefs or Supreme Court amicus briefs. And I think you mentioned state component. I think that's essential here. We know that the Republican Attorneys General Association and the coalition of red state attorneys general and state solicitors general are driving a lot of the action, right? They're moving a lot. They're responsible for a lot of the most effective lawsuits that are pushing the law farther and farther to the right. And I think it's in those cases, particularly, where we should expect to see a lot of action from Sauer's SG office and the Department of Justice, not least because he comes out of that world, right? He's a former Raga AG. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about his background, his connections to Raga, Leonard Leo, particularly the anti-abortion agenda that he's been sort of the tip of the spear at.
Yeah, it's really extraordinary when you look at his background. This is someone who was chosen by Josh Hawley when Josh Hawley was Attorney General of Missouri. He named Sauer to be the Solicitor General of Missouri. We know that Leonard Leo helped stake Josh Hawley's political career by helping to advance that AG position that he won, and then use that to become a senator. Right? You said the January 6th hurrah guy who then was running like a chicken, despite goading the crowd in a way. But John Sauer, in that post, he defended the state when it turned out that the state had been monitoring the pregnancy data, the menstruation cycles of women at clinics in the state. That's not all. John Sauer was also the lawyer who was defending that group that did those videos, basically, undercover videos that then were sliced up to try to attack Planned Parenthood. He's also the lawyer who has attacked efforts to have, basically tried to revoke the license of the only abortion clinic in Missouri. He's someone who, as Attorney General, as you mentioned, joined in efforts to back up an Arizona law that barred abortions for cases of severe fetal abnormality. He's someone who has also been at the forefront of attacks on ballot measures in Missouri that are designed to try to protect people's right to access abortion. This idea of what the states can do, and so you have someone who really is a major player and also a funder, has also funded some of those efforts. John Sauer has. He's a major player in this anti-abortion agenda that Trump has helped fuel, but also that Leonard Leo has helped fuel, because we know, and you know, Alex, that the largest funder, the biggest funder of the Republican Attorney Generals Association since it became an independent entity in 2014. So for the past 10 years, the biggest funder has been Leonard Leo's groups and operations. And so you have a situation in which Leonard Leo, this anti-abortion operative who has played a central role in selecting who is on our Supreme Court, has also grabbed the lever of power for the top law enforcement officers in the states, these attorneys general, by funneling money to Raga, which then uses that money to get people like Sauer elected or retained. And then they go on and do his bidding, basically continue to advance this extremism to deny women access to abortion, along with other things like, trying to overturn the 2020 election on baseless grounds, and otherwise doing the bidding of the far right billionaires. So that's part of Sauer's background. He's not just a lawyer who defended Trump. He's also a lawyer who's been at the forefront of attacking women's reproductive rights.
Yeah, I mean, and in this way, you can see the incentives for somebody like Leonard Leo, who I think largely finds Trump distasteful. Would have preferred somebody like Ron DeSantis to have prevailed in that primary process and taken presidency. But you can see his incentives at the end of the day for leaning so hard, uh, into the Project 2025 agenda, into supporting Trump, because here he stands, ready to put one of his allies into a critically important position of policymaking and lawmaking power at the Justice Department. I'm thinking back to these emails I reviewed as a Senate counsel between Brett Kavanaugh and a younger Leonard Leo. Brett Kavanaugh then in the White House, and Leo going apoplectic about a Department of Justice brief that recognized the value of diversity in a case about affirmative action. So, this is somebody who Leonard Leo I'm talking about, who follows these filings incredibly closely, has a super strong vision for what the United States should be arguing under Republican presidencies, and now has his buddy in charge, an ideological ally, right? Somebody who is a true believer in the stuff he cares about. So as these cases proceed, particularly in the abortion context, efforts potentially to enforce the Comstock Act, or to ban mifepristone access, or to limit again the reach of EMTALA, which requires provision of emergency medical services, including abortion. It's going to be a Leonard Leo theocratic, billionaire driven agenda out of the United States government. And sure, like Donald Trump likes him too, because he shows up and he's willing to say that he can shoot people in the street with immunity. But here's somebody that I think we should not just see as a Trump toady, but somebody who is deeply committed to a longer term ideological agenda that he's going to use his position to advance. And meanwhile, particularly against some of these positions he's taken would have been like disqualifying on their face in previous saner times, like the very argument he made before the court. But now, like, the court is endorsing this stuff, and so what ground do you have to stand on except to call out the corruption and devolution of this entire apparatus?
That's right. That's right. And I think it's worth underscoring that point, Alex, which is this election in some ways was brought to you by this Supreme Court, by John Roberts, who went out of his way to basically embrace the extreme theory of the law that John Sauer was putting forward, which was this idea that presidents should have immunity for official acts, which is not the law, not the Constitution, not the precedent. And even though Roberts tried to say that the SEAL Team 6 assassination was just a hypothetical, it's not hypothetical. It's a reality if you have a president who thinks there's no limit on his power. And now you have the lawyer who defended him, who pushed that extreme position in the law with the help of John Roberts and the Republican appointees, including 3 Trump appointees. You have that lawyer being rewarded with this top post at the Justice Department. And as you pointed out, Alex, he's not just a Trump appointee. He's sort of a Leonard Leo insider who's been, at a number of these Federal Society activities and events where, he's part of that sort of apparatus, this pipeline to power. And so it gives Leonard Leo's operation a really inside role within the Justice Department to move the law in the regressive, repressive agenda that Leo has put forward. And so I suppose we should wrap it up now and come back to some other things another time. But let me just thank everyone for tuning in to Legal AF and Court Accountability. You can find us on Blue Sky. That's Court Accountability on Blue Sky. That's the Lisa Graves on Blue Sky. It's Alex Aronson on Blue Sky. And also please hit the follow button. I don't know if it's on this side or that side, but please tell your friends, share this. We're going to be coming to you with real information about what's happening, why it matters, and also things you can do about it. So thank you so much for joining us.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.